We're now on Chof Zion, Omid Base. Still back to Rosh Hashanah, early for next year. We're picking up this point about, if you remember, hearing an echo. There's just a little bit of unfinished business on that as we turn the Omid to Chof Ches Omid Aleph. Right at the bottom of the Omid, Omar Rabbah. Some people actually have that as Omar Rava, as Rashi himself does. Important to know who he was. And remember, we've mentioned this several times, Rabbah being the teacher of Rava. Important to know who says which comment as this follows through into the halacha. Hello, Malcolm. Good to see you, Malcolm. Sorry, I haven't come back on your comments that you've raised previously, but we'll pick that up in due course. Thank you, Malcolm. And yeah, we've got Michael with us as well, and others will join as we go. Omar Rava, Omar Rabbah. Shoma Miksas Tekiya Babur. Now, if you remember this, we mentioned this in the Mishnah, more to be explained now. What happened here? You heard some of the Tekiya, remember, in a bur, and remember that we did see this in Halacha, going back all those years. They were trying, in many instances, they would be blowing in a place which wouldn't be known to people, keeping the sound down, the time of the Romans, etc. And therefore, we do have this halacha. It actually appears in Shulchan Aruch too, but it's the principle which is very important. Shoma miksas tekiya babur. Someone hears part of the tekiya in the pit, right, in a bur. Umiksas tekiya al safas habur yotza. Now, what does that mean? Now, let's have a look at Rashi. Kosal kadatach, the view, we think, kosal kadatach means enter our mind, what we think. To hochi koma, this is what this means. Hoya oimeid hu al sfas haber. He's standing on the side of a bar, and we'll just explain this in a moment. V'chaveiro tokea babar. Someone's blowing in a pit, obviously keeping the sound down. V'yotza lachutz. And this individual then rises from the bar to the outside. Perhaps then he realizes, or he's been told that it's okay to blow outside. V'yotza lachutz b'chatzi hatkiya. Halfway through the tkiya. V'ashme'inan hocha debiksas nami yotze. We hear from here that you are yotze with half a tekiah. Now, what does it mean? We saw this, if you've still got Chof Zion on the base. Have a look here, second line down in the Mishnah. These were, it could be something which is like, or l'soicha pitzos, which is a large barrel, a large container. Could have been a metal. An area, a cistern where you were blowing. And then what happened here? Im kol shofar shoma yotza, im kol havora shoma lo yotza. Very important that when you hear the sound of the shofar, if it's mixed together with an echo, and you cannot differentiate between the sound of the shofar and the echo, then you are not yotza. Yeah, so there we learned this halacha, and we'll more about that in a moment. If you're in the pit, presumably you would hear directly what's the shofar being blown. If you're outside, of course, again, it depends on the size of the bird, the size of the cistern, where the person was blowing. It may well be that outside you are not hearing directly the shofar. It's mixed together with an echo. And therefore, you're not hearing directly the sound of the shofar. So, what happened here? We think that the statement of Rabbah was where somebody was blowing inside, so that the individual listening is outside, presumably hears it, or so we think, together with an echo, cannot differentiate, and therefore is not yotza. Then half, as the Rashi has said, v'yotza lachutz, his mate then rises from the pit, from the cistern, if you like, v'yotza lachutz b'chatzi hatkiya, and the statement that we're learning from Rabbah or Rava is the biktsas nami yotza. You can be yotza with half. Now, assuming you've got the length of the note is long enough, you've split it off. The first part you have not heard, presumably, or that's what we think at the moment. It's mixed together with the echo. Then he comes out and he hears the full sound. It's all one long note, one long tekiah. We say yotze. Okay. Continues the Gemara, but mixas tekiah kodim sheyalo amod hashachar. If one knew exactly the moment of daybreak, you can only be yotze the mitzvah. We've learned that, remember? Yom Teruah Yelochem, we've seen that before. You're only yotze the mitzvah, or in the day, if someone was blowing a long tekiah, and pretty hard to exactly pinpoint the exact moment, but the theoretical point is very important. You heard half of the tekiah whilst it was still night, and then you hear half the tekiah in the day, third line down, mixes tekiah ach there lo yotza. There you're not yotza. So the question is, what is the difference between, if you're hearing it together with an echo, which we've learned before, it is not good, but then you hear the second half, only the sound of the shofar, your yotze. However, if you hear half the shofar at night and half the sound, that one sound of long tekiah during the day, assuming you pinpointed exactly when the day begins, then you are not yotze. Says the Gemara, Omalei Abaya, my shanol. What's the difference? Hosom de boinon kula tekiah b'chiyuva beleka. Hochanami boinon kula tekiah b'chiyuva beleka. Explains the Gemara and says, what's the difference between the two? We've learned before you need to hear a full sound. Imagine it's a tekiah. It's one long sound. The whole sound has to be heard as the sound of a shofar in the right time, right? What is the difference between hearing part of it, as we said in the beginning, which is an echo to mix with an echo, and you cannot differentiate between the two? You do remember going back a few weeks, we spoke about a trumpet together with a shofar, where the sounds are actually very different. You couldn't perhaps work out and focus just on the sound of the shofar. But if you've got a shofar together with an echo, where assuming the sounds are very similar, you may not be able to pinpoint exactly the sound of the shofar. But we said if you hear half of it, which is when the person's outside, totally the sound of the shofar, your yotze. What is the difference between that and hearing half the shofar sound at night and half during the day? Please have a look at Rashi. If this is Koydem Amud HaShachar, third line down of Rashi. Lav Zimnei. It's not the right time. Kudomino Meseches Megillah Kol Hayoim Kosher L'Tkiya Shofar. The various halachas where we had all day. Cast your mind back to when we did Megillah a long time back. All day is kosher for T'kiya Shofar. V'yolif Tama. What's the reasoning behind that? It's learned from, it says, Miyoim Teruah Yelochem. Doesn't say actually it was Skatem, but they're very interesting. It does not mention as another, look, Kachtem Lechem B'yom Rishon, when it talks about the Lulav. It doesn't say Skatem B'Shofar. It says, Yom Teruah Yelochem. It should be a day of blowing. Yom V'lo Laila. Okay, so now we're trying to work out what is the difference between the shofar being heard at night and day, half, or hearing a sound which is, you're not sure it's the shofar, and together with when the person rises from this boer, is now much higher up and you can hear him directly, there you are, Yotze. Says the Gemara. Beginning of the line is Veleka, the second one. 7 lines down, Veleka. Hochi Ashta. This is what it's all about. Hosom laila lav zaman chiyuvahu klal. Night, you are never yotza at all. Boer is a mokum chiyuvahu. La'oisana oimdim babar. The original suggestion of the Gemara is that the difference between the two is the following. In the case of night and day, you are not yotza at night. Nobody can be yotza at night, and therefore you cannot allow for that moment when you're hearing it during the night to combine with the time afterwards. Whereas those people that are inside this boer, this pit, who can hear the sound of the shofar, and we're talking about a case where there's no echo, people there are, in other words, it's a sound of a shofar. The person standing outside, again, this is only a suggestion of the Gemara at the moment, someone standing outside is hearing a sound which could be, people could be yotza with that sound if they were inside the pit. And therefore the Gemara is suggesting that's the reason why we can put that together with the sound of the shofar alone for this individual who is standing outside the bar. That's the Gemara's suggestion. Okay? That's the Gemara's suggestion. Okay? Says the Gemara, I've got another problem with this. Lememra de Sova Rabba. It sounds like Rabba is of the opinion that Shama Soif Tekiah below Tchilas Tekiah. And we mentioned this point before. Somebody comes running into shul on Rosh Hashanah and hears, imagine, the second half of the Tekiah. Okay? Everybody in shul hearing the shofar. He's running in, he's doing, I don't know, whatever it is. Outside, there he is, the doctor, rushing into shul, hearing the second half of the Tekiah. It sounds, therefore, what we're saying is, based on the first statement of Rabbah, that if you, because we're saying, because some people could be yotza with that sound, and when it's not combined together with the echo, therefore he will be yotze on that second half. Yeah, that's what we're saying. Says the Gemara, Lemeimer de Sover Rabba, Shoma Soif Tekiah below Tchilas Tekiah Yotza. Is that what you're saying? Umamela, in other words, as long as you've got part of the sound of the shofar, Techilas Tekiah below Soif Tekiah Yotza. Different if you were hearing at night and day, but if you're hearing it during the day and you only hear a half, it sounds like you would be yotza. Have a look at Rashi. Hochi Garcinon, this is the correct text, says Rashi. Lememra, to say, the Sova Rava, notice Rashi's Girsi, he's got Rava, not Rabba, the pupil. The Chishoma Inish Sof Tekiah, if someone were to hear the second half of the blowing of the tekiah, below tchilas tekiah yotza. Okay, there's going to be more following this now. Mamela, back to our Gemara. Tchilas, beginning of the line, tekiah below sof tekiah is also yotza. Is that what you're telling me? Says the Gemara, I've got a big problem with that because we've learned this before. It came up on Chov Zayin or Aleph. Toka Tor Shema, which is going to blow this suggestion that we made earlier. Toka Borishona. Do you remember this? Umoshach bishnio kishtayim ein biyodoi elo achas. Do you remember this? You blow, have a look at Rashi, Toka Borishona, Pshuto Shelifnei Trua de Malchias. Now we normally talk about, remember, there are three sets. Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah. I'm just calling the middle of the sandwich a Teruah. It might be a Shvarim that the Gemara will deal with in a few daf to go. But yeah, it's a sandwich. There's a Tekiah, there's a middle part of the sandwich. We call it a teruah, yeah, a crying sound, whether it's a shvarim or teruah, that the Gemara will deal with, but leave that aside. You've got the tekiah, you've got the middle part of the tekiah, tekiah, the middle part of the sandwich, and then you've got the tekiah. And you do the same thing 3 times. We've got psukim to prove that point. It's tekiah, middle part of a sandwich, a crying sound, and then a tekiah. And it mentions it 3 times, tekiah, yeah? Now, what happens if somebody, instead of blowing, and the easiest way to work this out, you've got Malchias, Zichronos, Shofars, if you like. You're blowing for someone not in shul, or even blowing elsewhere. You're blowing tekiah, middle part, tekiah, tekiah, middle part, tekiah, tekiah, middle part, tekiah, and that you are yotze min haTorah of blowing the shofar, if you knew what the middle part was, but we're not going into that for the minute. Now, somebody has come up with a brilliant idea. He blows tekiah, he blows the middle part, let's call it a teruah, a crying note, and then he blows a tekiah. But rather than blowing another tekiah, he lengthens the sound of that second tekiah. Are you with me? Tekiah, teruah, tekiah. Instead of being a normal sized tekiah, the length comes up later in the Gemara, he extends that to twice as long as it should be. Why? Because he's now going to count it as 2. If Rava has just said you can have a second half without a first half, or a first half without the second half, what's to stop someone just blowing tekiah, teruah, tekiah, double length, double strength if you like, and then a teruah, tekiah, double length, teruah, and then a tekiah at the end. If you don't need to hear the beginning, why can't you cut it in the middle? Says the Gemara Toshama, Toka barishoina umoshach bishneo kishtayim ein biyodo elo achas. That does not count as 2. Why not? Have a look at Rashi. Toka barishoina pshuto shelifnei teruah demalchias. Okay, so you've blown the tekiah. Then you've got the middle part. We're calling it a teruah. And then umoshach b'shnia, the second one, which is meant to be the end following that teruah, you extended it, double strength, double length. B'pshuta shel achreha, the pshuta means the straight note, which follows the crying sound of this teruah, kishtayim, double length, double strength. V'nischaven lotzes bo al Yedei pshuta shelifnei teruas hazichroinos. The second row is meant to be tekiah, again teruah, tekiah. But he didn't do it the second time. He just blew tekiah, teruah, double length tekiah, then again teruah. She'osid olov litkoya tekev lazeh, says Rashi. He's meant to blow another tekiah, but why stop in the middle? It's always hard for these people, and I'm sure Malcolm will confirm. The starting off is always the tricky piece. Once you've already got it in your mouth and you're blowing the tekiah, you might as well blow it twice as long if it's going to count as 2, rather than stopping in the middle and having to restart. But we learnt in the Gemara that's not true. It only counts as 1. Why is that different to what we've learned before? Says the Gemara, Va'amai, why? Tasalik lo betarte. Why shouldn't it count as 2? Answers the Gemara, no. Pesuke detkiaso mehadodi lo poskino. That's not a question. Because you can't break something in the middle to call it 2. What you can do, if you've got one long note, you can focus in on the second half of it to count as 1. the first part to count as one, the whole lot as one, but you can't split it because there's no beginning and end in the middle. You can't paskinon, as the Gemara says here, batate, tsalig lo batate, no. You can't break it in the middle to count it as two. But that's very different to saying, I'm just going to allow for the second half to be counted as one. So again, this latecomer rushing into shul, it would sound like if he rushed into shul, heard the second half of that tekiah, assuming it was long enough, he could count that as one. You can never count it as two halves or two and get a count of two for it, but you can get one. Or so we think of the meaning. Says the Gemara, I've got another question. Tor Shema. Now this goes back to the Gemara that we saw on Chov Zayin Amud Beis. This. Now we're focusing on a Mishnah which looks like a contradiction to what Rava said. Of course, Rava and Amira couldn't disagree with the Mishnah. So it looks like what he said actually is a direct contradiction to the Mishnah. Why? Because we've all seen this before. Someone blowing, very similar to our example here, blowing in the pit. Remember, we had three examples: a cistern, pitas, was like a very large barrel, and we explained, as we said before, why people were doing this to try and keep the sound down. They didn't want people to know necessarily that they were blowing the shofar. Okay, then the Mishnah says, "Im kol shofar shoma yotza, v'im kol havora shoma lo yotza." Have a look at Rashi again. Im kol shofar shoma, if he hears the echo, below kol havora, if he hears the sound of the shofar, says Rashi, below kol havora, without the echo, then he's yotza. Back to the Gemara. V'im kol havora shoma lo yotza. Look at Rashi. Im kol havora shoma im kol hashofar lo yotza. Says the Gemara, va'amai. Why? Leipag bitchilas tekiah mikame de la arvev kola. If you're saying, what happens with an echo? We know what an echo is. First of all, you hear the sound, then you hear the echo. It's true, as this person's blowing, they'll be mixed together. But initially, he must have heard just, if he did hear, just the sound of the shofar on its own. Yeah? Have a look at the Gemara, Rashi. But im kol ha-shofar shoma below kol ha-havora yotza, im kol ha-havora shoma im kol ha-shofar lo yotza. But why? Why shouldn't it be possible to hear the first part and be yotza with that first part before it gets mixed with the echo? So again, imagine the person is standing outside the pit. Even if he hears the sound of the shofar mixed with the echo, what about the first part? Is it not possible that, why didn't the Mishnah at least say that if he hears the first part before he gets mixed with the shofar, he's going to be yotza? And according to what Rava has said, you will be yotza if you hear part correctly and part incorrectly. So back to our Gemara. Answers the Gemara, Kika Omar Rava, no. Rava was talking about a very specific case, and now we've changed our tune. Kika Omar Rava or Rava, this is someone himself coming out of the pit. Have a look at Rashi. So now we're backtracking. If you hear part, you're not yotza. You've got to hear a beginning through to the end, of a kosher sound, whether it's in the day or rushing into shul and just hearing the second half is not going to be good enough. So how come it works in this instance? Says Rashi, it's not as if there's someone else who's being yotze like we had in our Mishnah. No. He's blowing inside the pit where he hears it perfectly. And then he comes up out of the pit. He never heard an echo. According to him, there's not somebody standing outside hearing the echo. The whole lot of this was kosher. When he was in the pit, it's true there may have been an echo outside, but he didn't hear that echo. He's in the pit. Then he comes out of the pit. Perhaps he's told it's okay. It's okay to blow outside. There's nobody around watching, etc. Says Rashi. Initially, they're both in the bar. And we said before, the people who are actually in the pit are yotze. So this is what happened to him. Says the Gemara. Well, then that's pretty obvious. You don't need Rava to tell us this, surely. Do you understand the point? He's blowing in the pit, no echo. He comes out of the pit, no echo. But why shouldn't he be yotze just because he's walking? Says the Gemara. Got to begin a line is b'tokea. If that's the case, my lameimra. What's this coming to tell us? What is the chiddush of Rava? He's blowing inside the pit. He's coming out of the pit and he continues to blow. He never hears the echo. Why should he not be yotze? Says the Gemara. Now, I might have thought that you need to be concerned about the following, says the Gemara. The same you might say, Zimnim demapik reisha vakata shofa babar. It's a dangerous thing to do if you want to be certain that you've actually been Makai in the mitzvah. Why? Because as you're leaving the pit, depends of course how the steps come out of this pit, it may well be that his head comes out first. I think perhaps he's backing off as he comes out of the pit. And the shofar would still be in the bar, and there will be a mixture of the sound of the shofar together with the echo as he ascends and leaves the pit. Says the Gemara Kamash Malon. Don't worry about that. That's not a general. Of course, if that happens, but generally that is not going to happen. And that's the chiddush of Rava. He's saying, don't be worried about that. Someone who's leaving a pit, as he leaves holding that shofar, he will be listening and hearing just the sound of the shofar. Not much of a chiddush, true. But we're saying here there's no concern. But going back what we said before, you do have to hear the beginning and the end of the sound of the shofar. Even if it's going back what we've said before, even if it's twice as long, you cannot get out of that 2 notes, number one. And even if you rush into shul and only hear the second half of that tekiah, that is not good enough. You do need to hear the beginning right through to the end. Now, it doesn't have to be twice as long, or the Gemara picks up at Daf Lamed Gimel, the length of that tekiah, but whatever length it's got to be, the minimum length or longer. Actually, there's no maximum length of a tekiah, but the Gemara will deal with that. Whatever the length you're blowing, you've got to hear the whole thing, the whole note from beginning to end. And it must not be mixed, as we've seen before, with this echo, because otherwise, if you can't differentiate between the 2 sounds, and as we mentioned before, a couple of weeks ago, if you will be able to differentiate the sound between the sound and the echo, in other words, and like you can focus, when we spoke about this point before, machlokas of the Rishonim, whether you're focusing on both notes or just one, But yes, clearly, if you can focus on just one sound and you know it is the sound of the shofar, then you will be able to, like as we said before, you've got a symphony, and if you're attuned to it, you can actually focus in on violins. You can focus in on particular instruments. If you can do that, then you're certainly yotze. Yes, Malcolm.
Yes, I understand that. I had two questions actually. Firstly, I have seemed to have a recollection that we were discussing this thing about the double length note earlier on.
Yes.
And that it was accepted. So I don't understand that now they've gone against it. But
yes,
was it?
Yes, you are right. It's accepted, but as one note. It's not accepted as two.
No, but there was
again, it just came up again here.
Yes.
Yes, it's accepted, but you can't split in the middle, even if you've blown the shtiya twice as long. You can't split that in the middle, and we saw that before on Chov Zayin Omid Aleph.
There was an earlier discussion of it. I thought it was.
Yeah. So you're
I thought they
right.
did actually. I thought they did actually discuss. Is it worth it? Can you do it instead of the two or something?
We did, and the conclusion was that yes, it's kosher, but it will only count as one because you haven't got an end of the first and the beginning of the second, as it's all. Goes one. It flows from the first to the second.
So you can just do it a longer note. You mean?
So you've got there's no problem having a longer note, but you will only count as one. Don't think because you've blown it twice as long that it will count as two notes. You've got to have a beginning and an end and a very clear cut-off point in the middle of that. Yeah.
Can I just say also about the night and the day question?
Yes.
Because obviously what you're saying is you can't either start at Tekiah and then it becomes nightfall, as it were.
Yes.
Well, because first of all, it'd have to be quite a long Tekiah for that to happen. But anyway, imagine it did.
Well, if you knew the exact moment, I mean, obviously theoretical. If you, I mean, the principle's important. The principle is that you can't blow, and therefore make sure it doesn't actually cut. Go through into the night, or the other way around in the beginning of the day.
Yeah, so only part of the call is not valid.
Yes, but there you'd have a problem.
Yeah, so
because you wouldn't have a beginning which was kosher.
Yeah, so basically, if you sort of happen to leave your shofar blowing rather late, and you were to do 29 calls or something, and you want to do your 30th, and you can't do it. But the mitzvah isn't just to hear the tekiah. But they don't seem to discuss that. So I don't understand. That discussion is about does the tekiah count? Are you yotze about the tekiah, not about the whole of the blowing of the shofar? Because the whole of the blowing of the shofar has to be. Why is the discussion only about the one note?
No.
You see what I mean?
The teruah or the shavarim, the middle part, are separate notes.
Yes.
So obviously, if the person, however long it has to be, and let's say there's a machlokas about that later on in the Gemara. Imagine you're blowing. Let's say you're meant to blow 9 separate notes. 9 of those, and this person's blowing 18. If you come in the middle of that, you will have heard 9, and there'll be separate notes, so that's fine. You with me?
But what I mean is,
it's only because the tekiah is one straight note. You haven't got a beginning in the middle of it.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is that the mitzvah, it wasn't just to hear tekiah; it was to hear the set.
Yes, you have a good point. Very good point.
So what they're saying is, it might be that you can listen to a teruah halfway through, then that's okay for the teruah. You're yotze for that teruah, but but if the whole set hasn't been
you won't
valid,
have that.
If one part of it.
That's a very good point. The set must be tekiah, teruah, tekiah. A set. If you haven't got Sorry, a bit like a
yeah.
Yeah, you've got the set, which is tekiah, teruah, tekiah. If you've broken that in the middle and you don't hear the initial tekiah, you've lost that set. The set must have, and the Gemara talks about that. You've got to have a sandwich. You've got the teruah in between the two tekiyahs. If you've lost a tekiah at the beginning, lost a tekiah, then you've lost the set. You'll have to have another set. And you'll find that if somebody made a mistake, it could be even in that final tekiah, he may have to go back to the beginning to make sure the whole set. Complicated halachas, but you need a set, and the set is tekiah, teruah, tekiah. And we have explained that point before, because the idea is, according to the Shloah Kodesh and many others, we've got the tekiah, which is the neshama, the pure, pristine neshama. Sadly, can be sullied, if you like. That's the teruah, the crying sound. But again, a person can pick up, move onwards and upwards, and we can end up with a straight, as we say, we can end up again, a person can change. There's always possible to change and move onwards and upwards, whatever the situation. However bleak it might seem, however difficult it might seem, it's always possible to move onwards and upwards. And you've got to have that set. The tekiah, particularly if you say it's representing the pure neshama, then you've got the crying sound in between, and then you've got the message at the end, which is, but it can become pure again. We've got to have that set. So you're quite right. Although you could pick up, there are 3 sets like that, and the Gemara will pick that up as well. So you could pick up 2 out of the 3, but you wouldn't have done the whole mitzvah. The mitzvah is 3 sets. Yeah, it's not the best of 5. It's the best of, I say it's 3. You've got to have all 3 sets. You can't just have 2 out of 3 and then you're there. It's the full 3 sets. Okay, so there you are, gentlemen, and that concludes this piece. And really, as we've seen before, so you've got to have a beginning, got to have an end, no breaks in the middle, but it shouldn't be mixed with anything else unless you can pinpoint that sound. And we've spoken about that before. It might be possible, particularly when it comes to the shofar, because you say once a year mitzvah, people are listening and anxious to hear the sound, and therefore you might be able to focus in on the sound. If you have, for example, a trumpet, which is a very different sound, a trumpet to a shofar. But if they're very similar, you're hearing the shofar and its echo, difficult to differentiate between the two. You might be able to if you were a professional Baal Tokeh, but if you can't, then you wouldn't be yotze because it's mixed and you're not actually hearing the sound of the shofar. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Not sure we're going to conclude this following piece because there are a few principles we need to pick up here. Yeah, go on, Martin.
I don't want to nitpick. Well, it is a sort of a nitpick, but I just wondered what they would say, the sages, of, let's say, a synagogue, which is a large, beautifully constructed piece of wonderful architecture that has what's called a sort of slight echo. And you could call it resonance or ambient, spaces, as, a different building. And then what are you, what are you hearing? I mean,
what are you hearing?
Still,
very good point.
It's never pure,
Are you hearing the sound of the shofar, or are you really hearing an echo on top of it? Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And that is covered. And you need to be careful. I mean, yeah, you're right. A beautiful structure, but what are you really hearing? Are you hearing the sound? I know that yes, you do want the acoustics to be good. And I suppose you could say strictly that it's the sound waves bouncing against the walls. But I think you could tell a difference between that and an echo.
Yeah, I mean, is it more a question of like the question is more like to do with distortion and what you would call in a sort of synthesized sound, reverberation and distortion and those sort of things that you want to actually.
I think that's the point. Are you hearing 2 sounds or 1?
Right.
Yeah, and you're right.
Okay.
If there is that slight echo to the, and the way to tell, I suppose, at the end when you stop blowing and you still actually hear the sound, then that may be a problem. You're right. So that would be something. If you are hearing a double sound, then that's not the sound of the shofar. That's the sound of the echo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Michael, back to that. Okay, let's move on. And I'll say we're just going to start off the next piece because this leads into actually the whole onward and then moving on about mitzvahs lav lehonos nitnu. We'll talk about that as we develop this. But before we get there, there's a few introductions that we need. Omar Rav Yehuda. Have you got it behind his Yehuda? B'shofar shel oila lo yitoka, lo yiska. What have you got? You've got an animal which has been designated as a korban oila, a burnt offering, going to be burnt, shechted, of course, and burnt. A burnt offering, the Kohanim don't eat any of the offering at all. And we'll see the difference between this and a peace offering, a shlomim, where, yes, when it comes to shlomim, the Kohanim have pieces, the owner eats part of the animal. And the Gemara says the following, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, b'shofar shel oila lo yitzah, don't blow a shofar, which is been consecrated as a burnt offering. V'intoka, but if you did actually blow it, yotzah, you are yotza, whereas a shofar shel shlomim, if it was the horn, right, of this animal, a ram, don't blow it, v'imtoka lo yotza. You will not be yotza if you blew the horn of a ram, which was designated to be a peace offering. Okay? Now, before we go any further, we're dealing here with what's called me'ilah, mem ayin lamed me'ilah, which means trespassing, which means utilizing something which has been designated to be a korban, could be belonging to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, if you wouldn't mind, Peter, back to your skills, back to Safaria, let me just find the posuk for you that I want you to turn to. Vayikra, chapter 5, posuk 21. Sorry, but we'll just start this off with some background information.
Norman, can you just say, was the horn taken off from the oiler? Was it?
Yes, it certainly was. And the question is, when was it taken off? We'll get to that in a minute, and Rashi will explain that for us. And Rashi actually says it was taken off while it was still alive, before actually it was shechted. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's first of all go to Vayikra 5. Not a bit too far. Vayikra Tanakh. Yes, Leviticus. Let's go to chapter 5, Posuk 21. You may want to make it a bit larger if people can't see. I can see, but I want to be a bit larger. Okay. Let's zoom in a bit. One more zoom for our friends. That's a bit better. Good, thank you. This is at the end of Parshas Vayikra. Nefesh ki secheto. This person, the Avera that he did was umoalo ma'al b'Hashem. It's a trespass against Hashem. That's actually, I think we've gone a bit too far. That's not the one I wanted. Hold on. Can we go back to 15? That's not the trespass that I was interested in. 15. This is another one. Here we go. Nefesh kisimo ma'al v'choto bishkogo. It says being unwittingly remiss. There you go. The Avera is done accidentally. Mi kodshe Hashem. about one of Hashem's, he says, sacred things. It's another was a korban. And what does he do? If you can click on commentary, please. Well, let's go for Rashi, most widely. He goes on there. Have a look there, the second one. V'choto bishgogo, and sin in error concerning the holy things of Hashem. Well, let's turn first of all.
Oh, sorry.
One before, it's all right. Yeah, the second statement. Can you just press on the Aleph first, and we'll come back to the English in a second. The second statement. What happened here? That's what the trespass means. He benefited from Hekdesh, from a korban, and Rashi then brings the source of that, what's happened, what the Aver is. But the crucial point is Shenene min ha Hekdesh. Yeah? Have a look now. You can press the A, just for the translation for us, which we just seen. Yeah, there you are. That one has derived some benefits of this holy thing, a korban. That we're focusing on a korban. Okay. Rashi explains where actually does it tell me you're not allowed to, because here this tells you the Avera and what you have to bring for it. Scroll down a bit more in the Rashi. Mi kodshei Hashem, those which are special. Can you again press the Aleph on that one? Because yes, hamiyuchodim l'Shem. This is the crucial point. Things which are designated entirely, Hashem means for God, for Hashem. Yotzu kodshim kalim. This comes to exclude kodshim kalim. What does it mean, kodshim kalim? Which slightly lighter korbanos, which are not only offered up to Hashem, but kohanim, others will derive benefit from them. It does not apply to and you can see those words. It says mikodshei Hashem. Only things which are yuchodim Hashem. Press the A, please. Yuchodim Hashem on that mikodshei. Scroll down. There you go. Those things were specifically assigned to Hashem. Therefore, sacrifice is holy in a minor degree. And that means something like a shlomim, a peace offering. Why is it minor? In as much as others, humans, derive benefit from it. Therefore, if you have derived benefit from this korban, it will not, the rule of Me'ilah will not apply. Let's just go back to the Pasuk itself. What happens if someone does derive benefit accidentally from these korbanos, something which is, where you translate it, unwittingly remiss? Vahevi es Hashem Hashem. He brings this oshom, guilt offering to Hashem. It is an ayil tomim min hatzoid. Again, it's an ayil tomim min hatzoid be'ekron. It tells you how much the value should be. Okay. It's kosher. Right. But the main point is this. You can see from here, from this posuk, and of course the Meforshim on this posuk, that we're talking here about Me'ilah. Me'ilah is something which belongs to Hashem entirely. Therefore, it does not apply to Shalomim. Okay? Now have a look at the Rashi, and this was Mervin's point. Actually, there's another point. We haven't got these super commentaries on Rashi. Let's have a look at Rashi first, and then I'll tell you what the Sifsei Chachomim says. I don't think if you go to commentary, don't think you've got Sifsei Chachomim there, have you? Press commentary, just scroll down. Have you got Sifsei Chachomim? Probably not. Wow, quite a lot. Keep going, JP. No, Kleyok Malbim, Sifsei Chachomim. No, you haven't. Got a lot. Oh, keep going. Ooh, really doing well here. Shut up. Oh, yes.
Both in Hebrew and English.
Oh, yes. Sifsei Chachomim. Can't imagine it's true. Well, I never. Good for that. Okay, scroll down because I want one Pirush. Oh, this must be a different Sifsei Chachomim. V'timol Mal Ribo. Keep going. Yotzu Kodshim Kalim. Yes, baby. We'll come to that in a minute. Hold on. Yeah, we're going to use that in 1 minute. Let's look at our Rashi first, and then we'll come back to this Sifsei Chachomim. Keep. Oh no, keep. I don't know. Oh, you can't do that. Can you keep that Sifsei Chachomim again for us? Go back to resources. I've lost. Oh yeah, there it is. Now, can you just keep that? Oh no, where? Have we gone too far? Keep
I can't.
Keep it coming. Scroll down. Oh, we lost it. No, I've gone too far. Oh, no, that's right. Yotzu Kodshim Kalim. That's what I want. Now. This is the point. Let's do the Sifsei Chachomim right now, and then we'll see our Rashi in our Gemara. Why are Kodshim Kalim? Again, Kodshim Kalim are considered korbanos which people, Kanim, the owners, would be eating part of the flesh of that animal. Now, see what the Sifsei Chachomim says, and don't forget this is a super commentary on Rashi. So you remember, Rashi says, where it says Mikotche Hashem, this comes to exclude Kodshi Kalim. Let's see this Sifsei Chachomim. Pirush, got it?
It's actually an amalgam of.
I beg your pardon? Got the malbim there? What? I'm sorry.
So I was just saying about the Ikas. Sorry, I should mute 1 minute. I was saying the Ikas Sifsei Chachomim is an amalgam, isn't it? That's a separate issue.
Yeah, that's separate. And Ikka, no, it's not even amalgam. What it is just in short, Ikka, by the word Ikar, Sifsei Chachomim.
Okay.
Yeah. The Pirush of the Sifsei Chachomim is in full, and then you've got the part of it. Yeah. So let's have a look at the comment. Have a look at this Pirush here. We'll have to close in a minute. Pirush. Shebosel Kodshim Kalim. Imagine you had a shlomim. Bein lifnei zerika, bein la'achar zerika. What happens? You're going to be shechting this animal. Imagine it was a peace offering, right? You're going to shech the animal. Then, eventually, the blood will be collected and sprinkled. And then, the shlomim can be eaten. Says the Sifsei Chachomim, whether it's before Zerika, bein la'achar Zerika, ein bohem me'ila. The rule about me'ila, this word, if you like, trespass, does not apply. Why? Mipnei she'enom miyuchodim l'shem levado. They are not specifically and only for Hashem. Rak, it's true. Einon necholim. There are certain places it can be eaten. It might have to be eaten inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. Depends which korban it is. For hutru lahedjet, they will become permitted for a hedjet, meaning man of the street. The ochlon, and he can eat them. Similarly, this is interesting. Bosa chatos and oshom. Again, Koidem Zerika, before the blood is sprinkled, Moalim Bahem. There will be this principle of trespass, but after Zerika, Ein Malim Bahem. Once the blood has been sprinkled, Ein Malim Kivin Shehutru La'ochlim Lakanim. Very interesting point. What we're saying here, we're talking about, it's perhaps getting a bit more complex, and if you've got Kodshi Kodshim, they belong to Hashem. Even a Chatos and Oshom, which is also considered Kodshi Kodshim, they're eaten in, further inside the Beis HaMikdash. Before the blood has been sprinkled, it's owned by Hashem, and therefore, if you derive benefit from it, that's the Aveira. After the blood is sprinkled, there's no Me'ilah. Why? Because they now become mutter for Kohanim. Whereas a Shlomim are never considered specifically for Hashem, because the owner himself would be allowed to eat it, not just Kohanim, the owner himself. Now, without getting too complicated here, we're differentiating between a Shlomim and, which is considered Kodshi Kalim, because it's actually considered owned by whoever the person is who's presenting this korban. In fact, he will be allowed to eat it. And therefore, it's not considered belonging to Hashem. Whereas if you have, moving up a stage, what's called Kodshi Kodshim, which are not eaten by a man in the street, Kohanim maybe, and Olah isn't eaten by anyone. That's certainly Kodshi Kodshim. And therefore, that is where the rule of trespass will apply. But only before the blood is sprinkled. Once the blood is sprinkled, there's no me'ilah on the parts which will be eaten by the Kohanim, because now they're transferred from Hashem, if you like, to the Kohanim. Okay, let's go back to faces. And this is the point, we'll just close with this Rashi. I think we'll have to come back to revise next time. Shel Oila, what's this Oila? Togshu Mechayim. If, again, the Oila compared to the Shlomim. The Shlomim is always considered second rank because the owners will be eating it ultimately, and therefore Me'ilah doesn't apply. It's got to be something which is, if you like, owned by Hashem, and then Hashem allowing the Kohanim to eat from it. So, what happened to this Oila? Oilah's not eaten by anyone. But there are parts which the Kohanim get. Look at this. V'tolshu mechayim. It was taken off the animal whilst the animal was still alive, and then blew the shofar. If the blood has been sprinkled, ein me'ilah lo ba'oira v'lo b'karneha. There is no me'ilah anymore with the skin of that animal or the horns. Why not? Shehakol lekanim. It's not belonging to Hashem anymore. Do you understand? And I think that's your point, Mervyn. What we're talking about here is utilizing the horn of an oilah, and it was taken off the animal whilst it was still alive, and it's not yet been given over to the Kohanim. So that belongs to Hashem, and that would be me'ilah. Okay, and he brings a phrase, psukim nema lo yihyeh ba'olah. There's a pasuk, the Kohanim is allowed to have with an oilah. Lo yihyeh, he gets. V'nema lo yihyeh ba'osham, ma osham atzmoisav mutorim af oilah atzmoisechom mutorim. Let's not go too much down there because we're stopping here. But the point is this. We're talking here about a burnt offering where it belongs to Hashem until the blood is sprinkled, and then it's true, they don't eat of the flesh, but the horns and the skins go to the Kohanim, in which case it's no longer belonging to Hashem. Me'ilah will not apply. In the case of Shlomim, it's always designated that people will eat from this korban, not just the Kohanim, the owner himself. And therefore, Me'ilah never applies to Shlomim. So it does apply to the Oilah, and we'll have to understand that in more detail next time, because it looks like you'd expect it to be the converse. An oila you shouldn't blow, but if you did blow this shofar, you are yotza. Whereas with a shlomim, don't blow, but if you did blow, you're not yotza. You think it's right the other way around. The shlomim, we just said Mila doesn't apply. But more of this, as I say, we're just like starting on this subject. More of this next week, all being well. So yes, watch this space. I think in case we made a comment at the beginning, we can stop the recording now. You may.